Welcome to the Wellness Wise Words. This is the podcast of Art and Tech for a Better World and the YouTube channel. Today, we're so honored to have here Nina Herscher, the CEO of the Digital Wellness Collective. And it is very special for me because we in Art and Tech for a Better World, we are a member of the Digital Wellness Collective more than 1 year. Um, I have the experience of Nina empathy leadership and the experience of a fluent dialogue in which everybody is heard in the collective. So these skills of Nina, I appreciate it too much, and I want to share with the audience to have you the experience in this dialogue that I am sure will be so fluent as usual. So I want to invite you to pay attention of she's a very an expert woman about digital wellness collective. Um, so I want to formally present Nina. Nina is the CEO Digital Wellness Collective and co-founder of Digital Wellness Institute. She's an international speaker and a digital wellness expert and curriculum development consultant, and she's based in Colorado. Well, Nina, welcome, and this is your space. So we share some points to talk in this conversation. I don't want to say interview in this conversation. And the first one is I am so interested in knowing about your previous experience that lead you to come to the digital wellness field, but all that you do as a young entrepreneurship is very interesting to know. So if you want to know to talk us, it was very interesting.
Thank you so much for having me, Alfredo. I think that the way that I came to this work and the way that I really arrived here was actually something that happened very early in my childhood. And so when I was a young child, I had a very hard time speaking. And I've been in speech therapy since I was about 4 years old. And I would use eye contact to let people know that I was trying to talk with them when I was having a hard time speaking. And I noticed that eye contact was becoming less and less common. And sometimes I would be trying to talk and people wouldn't even know because they would just be texting. And so I was very kind of intrigued and concerned by this shift in presence and in authentic human connection that I was seeing. And so it informed, I think, a lot of my professional journey around that. And when I went to college, I, focused on youth culture and how youth were communicating with each other. And then when I went to grad school for my Master of Social Work, I individualized my degree to look at the norms of connectivity and how the norms of connectivity in the 21st century were really reconceptualizing and changing the way that we interact and develop as humans. And so that was my kind of crash course on the educational path that led me to where we are today together.
Mm. Okay, so it's so natural to you to be in a deep contact with human beings. I feel, um,
Yes.
and this is what I experienced. Also, what people said about you and some comments I found and in your presentations in LinkedIn. So this aptitude consulting that emerged from you uh, is very clear for me. So I want to ask you about what you think about what was happened the last decade, the last 10 years about the behavior, the people behavior about the use of technology.
Yes, there have been so many changes that have happened. I think that one of the largest one, is presence and how our presence with each other has changed. But beyond that, I was actually just having a conversation with Rob, who's also in the collective, and we were talking about how, in more traditional ancient times, people would go out into the world and they would hunt and gather. And that was really the process of like, how do you, find friends? How do you find food? And now I think people are hunting and gathering differently through technology. And so I think that's one of the big shifts we see. And we can see that with COVID too, because people oftentimes are home much more. And so they actually cannot go out into the world to hunt and gather in the traditional ways. And so they're turning to their phones to kind of like harvest new information and new interests and to stimulate themselves and their brains in different ways. And so those are just a few of the shifts that we've seen. But I think that loneliness, the research shows us, is on the rise. People are much more distracted. Since COVID, how to get my brain to focus in terms of a search has gone up 300%. And people are really, looking for a way to feel the most human they can feel while also embracing all of the incredible things that technology has to offer. And so that's also what, has me focusing on this work and this kind of concept of digital flourishing that we talk a lot about at the collective and the institute really refers to, like, how can we engage with technology in mindful ways and enjoy everything it has to offer while associating ourselves with less of the harms, like tech neck and eye strain and loneliness. There's so many kind of different parts to what wellness looks like in this digital age.
Okay, so I understand that about your website that our attitude is and our education about these topics is so important. Is it?
Yes, absolutely.
Um, also, it's very interesting to know. I arrived a little later, and I want to know about the the early story, early history about the Digital Wellness Collective Foundation, the first movement about this and the first ideas. How was the foundation of the Digital Wellness Collective?
Yeah, so a little over 2 years ago now, the screen time tracking updates came out on iPhone and Android that allow people to easily see this is how much time you spent on your phone today on different platforms. And what happened is, Android and Apple are very kind of different. And Android had this outlook of there are other apps that, also help people to track their time online, but we can all exist together, no problem. And Apple started to quietly shut down a lot of the competition, which was really an issue for a lot of the folks in our space. And so at that point, I was in touch with Kim Cavallo and Andrew Dunn from Ciempo, and they invited me to become a part of this grassroots group called the Digital Wellness Warriors. And it was really about, how people who had been working in the space, developers especially, but also educators, were being affected. And so that group kind of came together to form this petition to Apple to let all of the apps exist together. And that was, the beginning of this movement and kind of the unification of an industry in a lot of ways. And as we know from history, sometimes it does, take a shared trauma of some sort, as horrible as that is, to unite us towards a common goal.
Okay, so it's the Apple stuff was a very important starting point, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the beginning is kind of tricky in terms of like how we went from where we were to where we are now. But I wish you had been there to see that with us because it was a very special time. But I think that where you've kind of entered our journey and seeing like all of the historical progress is the collective where we are now as a official trade association with almost 100 companies all over the world, and you being our prized member in Argentina.
Thank you very much. Yes. Um, okay. it's very good to share with the audience about the idea of mission because I feel that Digital Wellness Collective is growing up in a very clear way, but have a clear focus. It's very important to understand, to share with the audience this mission. How you do you can describe and how is your feeling about this mission?
Yeah, so the formal mission of the Digital Wellness Collective is to enhance human relationships through the intentional use and development of technology. And I think in that, the intentional use and development, that also speaks to who we have in the collective. And so in the collective, we have educators, and then we have developers. So the use and development. And it was very important to us in terms of our mission, our kind of key principles, that these two groups come together, because we can educate all we want, but if the technology itself isn't changing, and if there aren't new platforms, then we're just going to kind of be stuck. And so the heart of the collective in so many ways is to look at this from all different angles. Some people focus on how technology affects productivity, how technology affects children, texting and driving. There are all of these subtopics, but we're all in it for human health and enhancing human relationships.
Oh, that's very important. And yes, it's very interesting that you say that about these two groups, this one more related to the heart technology, and the other one more related to the human behavior. Um, and this is
Precisely.
yes,
Yeah.
this point is very interesting because from a long time ago, I perceived that in the cross of these two fields, two pathways, is the future. And technology is influence over people and people over technology. It's very important. Uh, but what I feel that is very interesting in the community of this the wellness collective that we
Mhm.
have these two approaches from different professionals, but with a human and a technology approach, and it's so balanced in my experience. And I think it's so important to understand is what we are doing to do. And I love also too much that you say about uh, the healthy relationships are a very important goal in all the Digital Wellness Collective is doing and working. Okay, uh, in your experience about this time, what is the best, the better experiences that you personally had in the collective?
There's a moment that happens repeatedly with different groups on different calls. And that moment that I enjoy so much is when someone enters into the collective or the institute and they kind of have this aha, this oh, I thought I was the only one, or I felt very alone in this work, and now I have a community. And so I think, this is so good, not just in terms of socialization or professional development, but also really for the spirit and for the evolution of materials. Because I think that when people come together and they share ideas, it can kind of ignite different concepts in different realms of the work that we could enter into that we hadn't even thought about. And so that is, I think, one of my favorite moments to see. And we see that, when people join and they introduce themselves. But I think it's more than a feeling of belonging. It goes much deeper, because being a pioneer in a new industry is very hard and can feel extremely lonely at times. And so, I had such an amazing time with you when we actually were able to meet at Wisdom 2.0 in San Francisco back in March before COVID hit, and they like literally shut down the last day of the conference. I mean, like we really just had that moment all together. And there were over, I think, 12 people from the collective who had traveled from all over to come together. And so it's not just an online community, it's, also about those in-person events and how we can support each other, how we can look each other in the virtual eye and in the actual eye when travel and safety allows to support one another in a way that truly is collaborative and not competitive.
Okay, so it's very important, and I experienced that you enjoy this very much, and you have the very clear that you emerge from you this enjoy. So it is very important to in this moment of the history of the Digital Wellness Collective, uh, try uh, to find or to describe the path, the ways you feel that they are open, and some goals, and the next steps we are thinking about.
Yes. So one of the next steps, I think, and goals of the industry is credibility, which is a really, challenging concept to talk about. And the interesting thing, because I, have all of this info, is that over half of the people in the collective who are in charge of these incredible companies went to graduate school. And so we have all of this rich education, but the education comes from different fields. So like we have like lawyers, teachers, you know, nurses, social workers. And so the credibility part comes in terms of like, what is the common language that we can speak? And are we all informed in roughly the same way, so that people know, what kind of training we're coming together around? And so that's part of why the Institute was formed. We launched Digital Wellness Day on May 1st of last year. The next one is going to be May 7th of 2021. And, we had over 35,000 people attend online events, and it was so powerful. And afterwards they said, we want something deeper, we want something more immersive. How do we become a digital wellness educator? And so that's when we really sunk our teeth into the creation of what is now the Digital Wellness Certificate Program, because people wanted a formal immersive training that they could go through with other people. And so I think in terms of goals in our evolution, that is part of it. And, right now we're the only certification program of that way. But I would love for, one day for there to be certification programs that are even longer and that are at colleges. Because when I was in college, like I was desperately looking for the programming that we've literally created this year, and it didn't exist yet. And so I think one of my kind of hopes is that other people won't have to go through that, and they'll be able to, easily locate our trainings. And we're, beginning to add more and more teachers from the collective into the Institute. So we have like over 17 teachers now, which is a lot to juggle, but their expertise is just so rich, that I just want to keep creating programming that is collaborative and includes all of the different voices and the unique expertise that they have to offer.
Okay, tell me more about the foundation of the Digital Wellness Institute.
It really strives to be a catalyst for change. And so we have a 10-week certificate program, and each week has a different topic. And so we have like a week that's on communication, relationships, environment, design. There are all of these different weeks that give you like a deep dive into what is the research in each of these categories, and then what does it look like to your audience. And for some that's human resources, for others, that's like their large team at a corporation. Right now we have people from the Army enrolled. We have all of these different audiences who are using this to then create their own programming for their teams. And so we love to see that kind of disseminate out and trickle in the most like natural, helpful way possible, because this programming on digital wellness and tech life balance is going to look different for every industry and every team.
Okay. Yeah. Um, uh, um, if you had to define what is digital wellness, a digital wellness experience for persons, and how we check we are living a digital wellness experience with technology. Uh,
Mm.
Help us to understand this. How can check it?
Yeah. So in terms of the formal definition and then like how we can check on it, when we're talking about digital wellness, we're referring to the optimum state of health and well-being that each individual using tech is capable of achieving, is capable of kind of obtaining, having. And so in order to check on this, you can always, imagine that the digital is almost in parentheses, and it's just wellness, and it's wellness in this age now. And I think that the term digital wellness can be confusing for people sometimes, but when we're talking about it, that's really what we mean. It's just wellness in the digital age. And there are so many different parts to that, right? And so um, we have an incredible research director, Dr. Sophie, over at Chapman in California. And what we've been working on together is how do we measure digital wellness and digital flourishing? Because there are all of these really incredible clinical tools to measure things like smartphone and internet addiction. But there wasn't one that looked at like how do we thrive with technology in different areas of life. And so if you go to digitalflourishing.com, that survey is free and there for everyone to just kind of take and assess what does their relationship with technology look like. And that survey is actually being validated right now, and so it will grow and change over time and become more of a clinical tool that people can use with their clients. And so what is up on the website right now is version 1 from Digital Wellness Day.
Okay. So, in your experience as a consultant, uh, how is the evolution that person, especially teenagers or adults, uh, can reach? How is the progress in a digital wellness experience? Um, how we can help to obtain this digital wellness experience? I want to extend a little more what you say because it's so interesting to me.
Yeah, so Susan Reynolds, who is one of the co-founders of the collective and one of the teachers at the Institute, does a lot of work with teenagers and youth, especially. And something, that she realized and that, we continue to be cognizant of is that we need to hear from the age groups that we're talking about and not assume that we know what they have to say. And so the biggest thing I think for teenagers is to allow them to tell us, like, what do they feel the problems with technology overuse are and how would they like to handle them? And if youth and if teenagers are involved in the solutions, then they're much, much more likely to integrate them into behavior change. And so, like, a concrete example of that is if a family at home wanted to make a communication charter where they kind of created this agreement about times when you wanted to use tech and you didn't. For example, maybe you don't want to have your phone at the table while you're eating, or you all want to put your phones in the kitchen after 10 p.m. You would want to talk to each other and hear from your kids and hear from your teens and say, well, what do you think is a reasonable time? And kind of like have them set their rules for themselves, because then they're much, much more likely to actually adhere to them.
Oh, okay. Uh, so it is a daily experience. I understand about your words that we must to work on it and learn. Um, uh, Not only me, there are a lot of people that testify that you have a so emphatic leadership, so empathy leadership, excuse me. What do you think about these skills that people say that you have? And is so something that is that something learned, something that you think that is natural to your to your person, something you develop, or a little bit of all the things.
You're so kind. I don't know which of those it is. I think it could be all of them. I think that my kind of speech disability as a child definitely played a role, because when you're young and you see how amazing and how horrible humans can be to each other, um, and you see through many different aspects of what it means to be human, and the treatment. I think that experience alone, made me very empathic and allowed me to feel very, very deeply and be aware of the feelings of my friends. And so that was hugely instrumental. And then I think beyond that, it can be taught. I mean, I have made a career out of, going to all different trainings. And so in addition to my graduate school education for social work, I'm a teen outreach program facilitator. And I have all of these other kind of supplemental certificates and trainings that I wanted to do, to create like this larger holistic approach. And each of those trainings gave me tools to be an empathic leader.
Okay. Um, in your experience in this leadership that that you are in today having in the digital wellness collective, um, how do you experience uh, the other part of this experience? Have you uh, noticed that people is feeling your emphatic leadership? What signs, what symptoms can we identify that we are developing an empathy leadership?
It's a good question. I have a little tickle in my throat from the
Very
dry
very complex.
Colorado air. Yeah. Excuse me. I think that one of the signs that someone is becoming more empathic and applying that to their work is when they're able to like kind of recap and repeat what someone else had to say in a very concise way that encompasses emotion and like depth of comprehension and understanding. And so, on our core team for the collective, that's what, we're all like, because you have to be able to listen to people, and you have to be able to hear like, what do they truly want to achieve, who do they truly want to work with. And the truth is that, many people come to the digital wellness work because of some stress or because of some trauma of their own. There's usually like a precipitating kind of event that like triggers them to enter this field. And so an example is, there are some people in the collective whose children have been killed by distracted drivers who were texting while driving, and that's what led them to do texting and driving education. Or like someone saw that their child was addicted to tech and they wanted to help other children, but there's always that triggering event. And so I think in order to effectively do this work, you need to be able to hear and feel deeply.
Okay. Excuse me, my question so detailed, but
It's
very,
okay.
it's
No
very interesting
problem.
to very interesting to talk about these things. Um, you have experience to live in San Francisco Bay Area, and now in Colorado. Um, what can you feel about the innovation spirit? Is something special in these places about the innovation, about the the go ahead with all the things.
I've actually talked about this with my fiance quite a bit because it is interesting to see where people congregate. And I think that what Denver, which I'm close to now, and San Francisco have in common is that they're both, very large hubs that are close to, you know, um, major international airports. And over time, they kind of became these places where people flocked to. And so San Francisco being the obvious one, and Denver is very up and coming. But in both places, I chose to live about half an hour outside of the hub in like a magical, amazing outdoor place that was very connected to nature, which is how I recharge. And so I think that I saw a lot of kind of commonalities with my colleagues where they either lived in the city for work or if they lived just outside the city because they didn't really like the intensity of being like in it. And I think that, we in previous times like would have moved to that place to be with those people who were doing that work. And now many of us can work remotely. So it's such an interesting time, and it will be fascinating to me to see how the different kind of tech hubs change as people don't have to live there anymore, but they can if they want to. And so I think that this kind of spirit of innovation had traditionally come from a place, and now we're going to see it coming more from individuals, coming from companies, and it's going to be more in their communications and in their offering, in their intervention, in their product, than necessarily like from their company headquarters and how that felt tangibly. So I think there are a lot of different shifts happening. But I do think that over time, both here and San Francisco will continue to be very large hubs of innovation because they're very special places.
Yes, okay. How you are in Colorado from this year?
Yeah,
Since
so we
when?
moved here about two months ago. We are in Evergreen, which is half an hour from Denver.
September. Okay. Yes. San Francisco is very special, and this is probably the also the university's movement, and there is a place with great ideas and movement of ideas. Um, so it was very interesting for me that in this place, in this part of the world, in all technology companies, the great are, and also in this place, probably uh, began this idea of digital wellness. So interesting for me this because maybe that we in another part of the world not so associated to technology, but in the same place. And that was my surprise when I arrived the first time to San Francisco, and obtained this feeling. So interesting. Um, well, you know that I talk a lot of looking for a better world. I probably am dreamer, uh, but our organization is Art and Tech for a Better World, and when I get in touch with you, and you, Pat McCann, you put me in contact with you, and you tend to invite me to be a member of the Digital Wellness Collective, uh, I feel that a great part of our mission are similar or the same to the Digital Wellness Collective. Um, and especially, I would love to talk with you about what you imagine for the future that the Digital Wellness Collective and the digital wellness in general is contributing for a better life and for a better world for the human being.
I envision a world in which digital wellness is something that people are kind of like taught in school from the beginning. And also, something that is incorporated into the onboarding process of most companies at most jobs. And What I mean by that is this kind of notion again of having a communication charter or norms. There are countries that are actually beginning like to make laws around, you know, you are not allowed to send emails to your employees like after a certain hour in the evening, or at least they're not expected to respond. And I think that in the US, we have such a hustle culture that in a lot of ways people don't want that, or they're afraid of that. And they're afraid of, you know, what does not being on 24/7 look like for my job? But I think in general, the more that it can come from leadership as a wellness norm to take care of yourself, to focus on your health after hours. And, you know, for some people that means, you know, being on technology, watching a show to unwind. For other people, it means reading a book. We're not saying that one is right and one is wrong, but I think that in the future, we're going to see that digital wellness is a norm and not something that we have to kind of talk people into realizing is important. And this, you know, also just has to do with the fact that like we all started interacting with mobile technology, especially at different times. And so like there are these generations now, these digital natives who grow up not knowing anything else. And right now there are no kind of norms. There's almost no etiquette around technology usage. But I think in the future we'll be creating that. We're creating it now. And I think in the future also we'll be seeing that it is really a luxury to be offline. And I think that especially after COVID, there actually like will be extremes of communities that come together and are really like entirely offline communities that actually live together. And so I think that extremes for the most part aren't healthy, but we're definitely going to see more extremes before we find that healthy place in the middle.
In the middle, right? You think that this future is right now beginning, or you perceive this for further steps?
I think it's already started. I think that the movie, The Social Dilemma, is a part of really opening a lot of people's eyes to ways that they're being manipulated by the algorithms to be kept on their phones without even knowing. So I think that from that movie, there is kind of this additional wave of people who are like, oh, I want to take back my agency. I want to take back my time. I don't want to feel controlled. So I think it's happening now, and we're going to see a lot more of it.
Okay, it's contributing a lot. This was a shocking film, very strong emotion, move emotions. So I agree that's very, very important. Um, so I want to, we are arriving to the time. So I would love to have a more free space that what you want to say to us, to the audience, to the whole world. What you think that is your message today for us?
My message today is to be true to yourself and to carve out time for alone time and for introspection, because our world can be noisy and overwhelming and we can feel extremely on call. And without carving out that time, it's hard for us to know who we are and to know what we need. And like we can't possibly execute on a digital wellness self-care routine if we don't first know what we need. And so I think for everyone, that's a really important first step. And, you know, also acknowledging that everyone is really in a different place. And so for some people, like having alone time right now just isn't going to be realistic, but, you know, maybe they can close their eyes and like go into a room and do a little meditation, or, you know, like how can they adapt? And I think the other thing is this idea of flexible routine also having to do with self-care. And so this kind of notion of flexible routine is that because our schedule changes so much, Sometimes it's not realistic to have the same routine every day, but to make sure that you do something for yourself every day is really the flexible routine. So as an example, I might, write in my notebook, like my list of self-care activities for the morning and the evening. And based on what I have to do that day, I will choose at least one thing from each category, but they might not be the same every day. And that's okay. Just making sure that you're checking in with yourself and allowing yourself that time for introspection and reset is one of the biggest things that we can do, because being okay is not a luxury. Being okay is essential. And it's up to each of us to really model the behavior of not just wellness, but like health and flourishing that we want to see in other people. So the change always starts with each of us.
Well, thank you very much, Nina, because you, in this final message, you bring a lot of tips and a lot of advices in a so warm and charm way that I felt this moment. Um, it is very interesting because you are saying so practical things and that make it possible to have a healthy life. I am so honored you are having here. I am so honored to talk with you, and I am thankful to life to get in touch, to be introduced to you, and have this kind of interesting dialogues, um, always with my vision and what we are going to do from now on because it's so interesting for me. So
Thank
thank you.
you so much for having me. And I will be sure to email you the free toolkit. And you are also kind enough to translate our survey into Spanish. And so that's something that we can provide as a resource to all of your incredible listeners.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm sure that the audience will enjoy a lot this conversation and have the opportunity to have another one in the future.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.